Welcome to episode 221 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is 7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/221. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. So this week on the show, I'm back with a solo episode, and it's actually another life update episode. So this is my 5th time of doing one of these things, and the last one was back in June time. So I've actually managed to be a little more regular with it rather than once a year. And I try to keep the regular episodes fairly stripped back and just deal with the topic at hand or the guest at hand. I have obviously started to include on some of the shows recommendations of things to watch or things to read or listen to, but I put these at the end, so it's very easy to just shut the podcast off if you don't want to listen to them. But on the sort of personal front or on the life front, I don't mention much in the intro to the shows. Not everyone wants to spend the start of every episode hearing what I've been up to or what's going on with my life. So it's then these episodes that I like to include that stuff for the people who are interested and enjoy hearing about my life and what I'm up to. And for anyone who doesn't care about this, they can simply skip this episode. So I know it's incredibly cliche and trite of me to say this, but obviously 2020 has been a strange year. At the point of recording this, the UK, not the US, the UK has just come out of its second lockdown. So the first lockdown was between the 23rd of March and the 4th of July. And then the second lockdown was a 4-week circuit breaker starting on the 4th of November until the 2nd of December. And this next little bit may be obvious for those living in the UK, but I wanted to mention it for anyone who doesn't live here and doesn't know what has been happening. I know that when I talk to clients and they're in the US or in Germany or in Canada or wherever they are, I'm always intrigued about what restrictions they have at the moment or what they can and can't do. So yeah, I'll just cover a little bit of that. At the moment, England has now started a tier system. So there's a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And depending on the tier that you're in will depend on what restrictions apply. And the vast majority of the UK is tier 2 or tier 3. I think there's only like 3 places in the whole of the UK that's in tier 1. Where I live is in tier 2. And this means you're not allowed to meet anyone indoors who is not part of your household. So even with friends and family, you can't meet them indoors. You are allowed to meet people outdoors, but only a maximum of 6 people. And of course, you need to be socially distancing when you do that. You are allowed childcare. So we have been allowed our childminder or our nanny to help look after Ramsay, our son. This wasn't allowed during the first lockdown, but it was allowed during the second one. For parent and toddler groups, you can also meet both indoors or outdoors. So if we take Rams to a forest school or an indoor group, that is allowed. Although luckily he missed going last week. He was just in more of a wanting to stay home mode and said he didn't want to go. And then it turns out that the person who runs the group has tested positive for COVID. So it was good that we missed that one and we're not now having to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. Gyms and indoor activities like rock climbing are open again, but they were closed for both the lockdowns. Pubs and restaurants are open, but you aren't able to just drink alcohol or just drink drinks. These have to be consumed while serving a full meal. And they also have to close by 10 p.m. They can remain open longer than that, but they have to be then for takeaways for food. Masks are encouraged and recommended when inside a building, so inside a supermarket or a post office or inside transport like a train, they are mandatory. So basically inside you need to wear a mask, and this is for anyone who is 12 years of age or older. But outside, you don't have to be wearing a mask. And I mean, where I live in the countryside, you are so spaced out from everyone that, yes, if I'm walking outside, I'm not wearing a mask because I'm just genuinely not seeing human beings. Or if I am, I'm very far away from them. But we'll be wearing a mask anytime I'm indoors. And there is, look, a very long list of do's and don'ts and the different rules, but that kind of gives you a general idea of things that are most directly affecting my life. Obviously, we are heading into the Christmas period, and under these rules, anyone in Tier 2 or Tier 3 would be unable to meet with family or friends during this time. So the government has created a 5-day period from the 23rd of December to the 27th of December where the rules are relaxed. So you are able to mix with family and friends indoors, but this is for a maximum of 3 households over this time. So they talk about creating a household bubble. And you during that window, we are allowed to mix more, and then it goes back to the normal tier system after that. And from a virus passing perspective, it's likely that the relaxation will lead to more cases, but I think the government recognized that if they didn't officially allow this, that many people would flout the rules, and so it was going to be more realistic and making it fair so that everyone gets a chance to see people and not just those that choose to break the rules. But it does feel slightly weird that is then happening after having a lockdown for 4 weeks, that then straight after that we're kind of going into a period where everyone's allowed to mix again. And so I've been reflecting on the kind of pandemic and what I've learned this year, or what it's taught me this year, or what I've experienced this year. And there are a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, the first one, which may seem obvious, is just how much I miss seeing friends and family in real life. Like, Zoom is wonderful, but it is definitely not the real thing. And while this may seem obvious that I would miss people, it's actually something I've noticed much more recently. And I remember when the first lockdown happened, just feeling like I actually don't see friends that often anyway, and that it wasn't that much of a readjustment. I moved from London to the countryside 7-ish years ago, but really all my friends are still in London because I don't have a job out here, which would mean that I would then make friends out here by having a job where, well, I have a job, but I'm not going into an office where I'm meeting people. I don't have particular activities that I do out here where I'm kind of coming in contact and being able to meet people. Like I play golf, but the times I play golf, I'm meeting up with friends from London to do that, or I'm playing on my own. And so I just don't have a friends group out here. And so it just felt like, actually, I don't see friends that often, so this isn't going to be that different from usual. But actually, the reality turned out to be very different. And I did realize just how much I did used to see people. And, for example, my parents visit at least once a year from Australia. And, in fact, since Ramsay's been born, my mum comes over multiple times a year, and we will hang out here or we'll go away together. In the summertime, I'd usually see friends a couple of times a month. We'd play golf, or there'd be birthdays, or I'd catch up in London. So it kind of felt like I wasn't seeing people that often, but in fact, once this changed, it was just obvious how much it was happening. And I mentioned that we're now in Tier 2, and I was reading recently that it's likely that this is going to be the case until Easter time. So really from now, except for Christmas, until Easter time, so basically 6 months, we can't go to friends' houses or hang out indoors. And yeah, that news and reading that news article just really upset me. And not because I don't think that it's the right thing to do, but more just because I miss seeing people in real life. So I do think, for me, I guess like many people, just the realization of how much I value and miss seeing people and having human connection. And as someone who is a kind of card-carrying introvert and loves my own company, it can be an easy thing for me to forget until this is taken away and this is gone. And it really has made me start to understand the problem of loneliness. And I've looked at the research around loneliness, and I know the comparisons that are made with loneliness in terms of equivalent to smoking a packet of cigarettes a day or something along those lines, and know its implications from a health standpoint. And so I knew the stats, but I just didn't know it on a visceral level in the way that I do now. And I'm saying this as someone who has a partner and has a child and doesn't live alone and gets plenty of hugs and plenty of connection. So I know that I don't even know the half of it, but I feel like I have a somewhat better understanding than before this all started. This year's also been a time for reevaluating money and how I spend money. And I'll talk a bit more about this when I cover what's going on with Seven Health as a business. But yeah, the first half of the year was tougher financially than it's been in a long time. And my sister got married in Tasmania at the end of January, and we had a 5-week holiday leading up to this. So we were in Thailand and then we went to Australia. So it was a rather expensive holiday, but with the intention that 2020 was going to be a good year and we'd make up for it once we returned. But yeah, things were then much slower. And so we had a period of just going through all our finances and cutting back on everything that wasn't essential. So going to just like the absolute bare necessities and just realize how much we'd spent money on takeaways or going out to restaurants or different subscription services, or what I was paying for my CRM for sending out emails, and just how much all of these things add up. And it was interesting, like for a while, it made me think that once everything does open back up, that people are going to be really reluctant to spend money. That once you stop going to the pub and paying, I don't know, £4 or £5 for a beer, and you're used to just having something at home, like, will the cost just feel so much more? Like, it just feels so much more stark because you've had this period of not spending that money. And this is really how I kind of thought for the majority of the year until recently. And I think it now feels like it's slightly going the other way in terms of my feelings, that things have been closed down for just so long that there is this feeling of I want to be experiencing life again. And that I do want to be then going to the pub or going out to a club night or going to a concert or going on holiday, that the value of these things has started to increase again because it's been missing for such a long time. I saw a post recently saying something like I'm never going to leave a club night early again. I'll stay there and help them cash up. And it kind of made me laugh. And it's also so sort of true. Like, I feel like that when I'm back able to have these kinds of experiences, that I will just appreciate them in a way that I haven't for so long because it's been taken away. And so, yeah, it's been a real interesting year in terms of reevaluation of money and of spending and the value of money and what's important. And it's not that I'm then wanting to be a miser and never spend any money, but more for the fact that spending things on the things that make a difference and the things that are then really enjoyable and that you then really appreciate as part of that spending. But I do also think that this is going to be a little way off. Like, I think it's going to be a while before life completely gets back to normal in the way that it was before, where we're able to just go out, there's no mask, there's hugging, there's shaking of hands, there's all of those things. I was listening to a Sam Harris podcast recently where he was interviewing Nicholas Christakis, and Christakis was commenting that he didn't think that things would be back to normal until 2024. So that still feels like quite a long way off, and I hope he's wrong on that. But I can also see that even with the vaccine, it takes a very long time to put all those things together, to get it out to everyone and all of that. So yeah, I think life in terms of it being normal like we used to remember is not going to be just around the corner. So next topic, Ramsay. So yeah, Ramsay is now 3, which feels kind of mind-blowing. He's speech and his comprehension is really incredible. I know they talk often about like girls having stronger speech than boys, and that's definitely not the case for him. He's very good. He also has just an insane memory, and remembering things when he was really little that I wouldn't think he would remember, in terms of places we went to or things that happened on a particular day when he went to this place. It really is pretty incredible. And it's kind of a double-edged sword with it, because it's then easy to forget that he's just 3 and that his brain isn't fully developed. And then I'm thinking, like, why is he being so irrational in this moment? And then I remember that he's a 3-year-old, and this is what 3-year-olds do. I've commented before that he is a sensitive kid, like a highly sensitive child. And this is definitely still the case, and is now more evident when he hangs out with other children around his age. And he's not, while he's a massive talker when we're around, when he's in that environment, he's less talkative, and he's much more of an observer and on the edges, and he just wants to do his own thing more and play on his own, as opposed to really paying attention to the other kids or interacting as much. Obviously that changes a little bit more when it's just one other person, but yeah, he's still doing a lot more of independent play as opposed to kind of joining in. His eating is kind of slowly coming out of a more beige phase. Yeah, I remember when he was really young and we were doing baby-led weaning, he would just really eat everything and anything, and he would sit down and have really quite large meals. And now it's much more of a tendency for him to be just eating 1 or 2 things at a mealtime. So he'll eat all of the chicken or all of the potatoes, or just a bowl full of strawberries, or a plain bowl of pasta, or a kind of a bagel with jam or something like that. And then that's it. And he typically eats little and often, as opposed to wanting to sit down and have a full-on meal. And some of that could be just trouble sitting still for long and getting bored with eating. But I also, just think his tendency is much more as a grazer, or someone who eats smaller meals more often than anything. Kind of going through a phase in the moment of really getting to understand feelings and how to deal with them, because there's definitely more of a meltdowns or more kind of challenging moments, and getting into understand, okay, how are you feeling right now, and what can we do with that, and not necessarily always wanting to change the feeling, but just recognizing what it is. And so we've got a book around feelings, and so we can go to the book and it has, are you feeling happy or sad or bored or embarrassed or lonely or whatever it may be, and then we can turn to the page that corresponds with that feeling, and there's different things that you can read about as part of that. So that's something we've been doing with him. He is currently, and when I say currently, it's been going on for quite a while, currently obsessed with tractors and diggers and that kind of machinery. Our nanny, her dad or her brother has some subscription to a tractor magazine, and so I think they have a stack of them at their house. So Rams is constantly coming home with tractor magazines, and so reading ad nauseum about tractors, and he knows all of the different types of tractors and the different attachments that go on them, and he's got all his toys, and he's constantly filling up tables with macaroni that he's then digging and putting into trailers and all that. So that is a big focus of how he spends his time. He started watching screens. I think in the last one of these that I did, I said that he still wasn't watching screens, and we were trying to prolong that as long as possible, and wanting to get that to sort of age 3 if we could, and we pretty much did that. I mean, he would watch on our phone, he'd watch videos of us or him that we'd taken, or of his cousins that had been sent over, or he'd look at photos on the phone of all of us. But he wasn't watching anything outside of that. But that has now changed, and he would watch as like a tractor program on TV. He watches like nursery rhymes, that kind of thing. So yeah, there is more screen time than he was having before. He has recently discovered Siri on the iPhone. So he's just asking Siri to do all manner of things. So Siri, set a timer. Siri, how many days is it till Christmas? Siri, turn on the torch. And yeah, using the iPhone with Siri's assistance. I mean, sometimes it's just telling Siri what is going on in the room, and there's a lot of I don't understand the question. But yeah, that's kind of like his new thing at the moment. I remember commenting, I think it was at the end of year show in 2018, where I go through my favorite books and documentaries and stuff, that I had listened to Alfie Cohen's book Unconditional Parenting, and that it was my kind of one of my favorites for the year. And it's actually something that I've recently revisited again because it's so good and it's just so helpful as a reminder of different things. And the premise being that you want kids to feel unconditionally loved. And this doesn't mean that you say yes unconditionally to every request, but it's about, like, pretty much every parent would say that they love their child unconditionally, but the premise of the book is how do you make it so that the child would answer the question in that way, or when they are an adult, that they'd answer the question in that way, that yes, I felt unconditionally loved as a child. And so a lot of it, I mean, it focuses on many different areas, and like understanding how to foster intrinsic motivation, how to kind of work with the child as opposed to doing to the child. It's kind of letting them know that you love them for who they are, and not because of good grades or winning a trophy or because they're quiet or obedient or anything along those lines. It talks about the problems with both punishment but also rewards, and also with praise, and that praise isn't this thing that's positive, and that it can also have a problems associated with it. I have it on Audible, and I love Alfie Cohen's narrating and his enthusiasm for the topic, as well as the fact that it's just like really well researched and clearly evidence-based, and yeah, so it's not just in terms of like how do I get a child to be compliant, but rather like how do I parent in a way that is likely to create this happy, resilient, and moral human being. So yeah, I really like the book. I highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out before. And really, it's kind of the ideas and the ethos of unconditional parenting that I regularly come back to, and especially come back to now when things have been more challenging in terms of his emotions, or it's been more challenging because our nanny has been off for long stretches and it's just Ali and I, or if Ali's been unwell and it's just him and I. So yeah. And kind of also in a sort of similar vein, like the idea that so much of a child's personality and interests are innate, and that rather than starting with some blank canvas, that you then parent into a way that the child then is kind of desirable, that you think is important, that he's already his own being, and he has his own likes and dislikes and strengths and interests, and it's about then supporting these things. And so if he then turns out to be someone who's really interested in STEM, then we'll do more STEM. If he is someone who's interested in arts and drama and music, then we'll do more of that. It's not that he's some extension of me or my ego. He is his own self, and it's like finding out what is his way of being and what are the things that he likes, and how do we encourage more of that or support more of that. And another area that I've thought a lot about is like when I was growing up, kids on average just had much more freedom. Like I remember being 7 or 8 and being off on my bike on my own or with my brother, like just riding around the neighborhood. We'd ride up to a park that was maybe, I don't know, a kilometer away from our house, maybe more than that. We'd sometimes walk up there. We'd take a football. We'd ride to some shops that were probably, I don't know, 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers away. and that was just completely normal. I remember getting a bodyboard when I was pretty young, and then a normal, like a foam surfboard when I was probably 7 or 8 or 9 or something like that, and then like a fiberglass surfboard when I was 10. And so by having that, it meant that going into the beach, I wasn't allowed to then be in the flags. I had to be sort of to the side of it, and yeah, rather than just being on the shoreline, I was like way out the back. And I know now that my mum was sitting on the beach nervously watching, but she never let on with any of this. I just thought that was completely normal and that was fine for me to go and do that. And there were definitely times where I was out of my depth and I was being kind of pummeled by wave after wave, but I would always be fine and make it back in. From age 9 or 10, I'd ride my bike to school. Not all the time, but some of the time. It was probably about 3 kilometers away, and it was mostly quite suburban streets, but it did then involve going along and crossing over some fairly main roads. And these are just like a couple of examples, but there are many others. And all of these are situations that were normal, and no one thought twice about any of these things, but B, was pretty crucial for then helping me to feel confident and capable, and all of these things that I didn't really recognize at the time, but have then helped in terms of self-esteem and all of those components. And I've just really thought about how important that is, and how much I want to foster that with Rams as well. And I've listened to a number of podcasts and read articles with people like Jonathan Haidt and Lenore Skenazy on this topic. So Skenazy wrote an article and rose to prominence after writing an article about letting her 9-year-old ride the subway on his own, and going from a store and the subway and then a bus and then catching that all the way home. And she'd let him do that at age 9, and that then caused quite a sensation. Haidt wrote a long piece for The Atlantic called The Coddling of the American Mind, and then Haidt and Skenazy wrote a piece together that appeared in Reason.com called The Fragile Generation, and I'll link to all of these things in the show notes. And then, Haidt and Skenazy, along with a couple of others, have created an organization called Let Grow. And it's about like allowing kids to step up and for parents to step back, and kind of trying to create the childhoods that a lot of us had back in the 80s, where we were allowed to do things. And so we are trying to do this in a number of ways. And obviously at this stage, Ramsay's only 3, so we're limited in how much we can do, but there is still a lot that we can do. One of the things I'm conscious of is not saying, like, be careful, and just having that be just a regular thing of just saying, be careful, where it's this kind of throwaway line that can be easy to say when a child is like running off or climbing something or riding a bike or riding a scooter. And it's not that I won't say it at all, but if I'm going to say be careful, there is then something specific that I'm saying be careful about, and spelling it out. So if he is climbing on the table and there is a sharp knife on the table, I will either move the knife, or I'll say, look, there is a knife on this end of the table. If you're going to climb, can you climb on the other end of the table? But I don't want to be just constantly tossing out the phrase of just be careful. We have a wall outside in our garden, just outside our kitchen door, that he loves climbing onto. So it's about 50 centimeters or a foot wide at the top. So once up there, he's able to kind of walk along it. So it's not too tiny, but then it's next to a wall that has a hedge on it. And in summertime, the hedge gets quite thick, and Rams loves to get up there with like scissors or with secateurs and to cut it himself. Or he'll just go around the garden cutting different things with them. And I'm happy for him to do this unsupervised. So he'll come into the house and say, hey, I want to do some cutting with the scissors. And he'll then just climb up onto the counter, get the scissors down, climb back down, and then we'll go outside and do some cutting. And I've explained that the scissors are sharp, and he knows that they're sharp because he can see they cut things, but I'm happy for him to use them and to trust him. And there are times when he starts running with them, or I see that he jumps down while holding them. And so if I see this, I'll explain that's dangerous and why not to do that. But it doesn't make me say, hey, you're not allowed to use those things anymore. It just makes me want to explain to him why that is dangerous to use it in that manner, but he can go on cutting the things that he wants to cut and do what he was already doing. He has started to do rock climbing. I think in the June time or the July time, we discovered, this was after the first lockdown, we discovered a rock climbing center that had opened up about 10 minutes drive from our house. I think it had opened at the beginning of the year, but we just hadn't discovered it yet. And the proximity, obviously being so close, was great, but what was most important was there was no age restriction with it. So since Ramsay was able to stand, he's just been a climber, and he's been climbing on everything. And we'd wanted to find a rock climbing place that we could go to, but everywhere we could find, there was a minimum age limit. So he had to be 4 or he had to be 5, and so it just wouldn't work. But this place, there is no age limit as long as we are taking responsibility for him. And so he started rock climbing at age 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. And the center is all bouldering. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's where you're climbing without ropes, but underneath all of the climbing areas, there are these big mats underneath that you then just fall down onto. And you can still go pretty high. Like you can be, 5 meters, 6 meters, nearly 20 feet off the ground. And Ramsay just absolutely loves it. And there are many times where he starts to scare himself a little bit, and you can see that he's pushing himself outside of his comfort zone, and he may look down, and he's super high up, like way higher than I can reach him, and he has to then figure out how to climb back down. But this is like really confidence giving, and where every time we go, he could do a little more, and he feels more confident. And I will say that he's, because of the sort of highly sensitive side of him, there is a lot of pausing and checking. So he will only go for challenging moves when he knows he's fairly close to the ground, and I do feel safe where he's checking all of the different handholds and working out how much he can grip onto it. So maybe with a different child who was like very reckless, there would be more of a fear with it. But with his disposition, I feel very confident with him doing these things, and he absolutely adores it. And he is a phenomenal little climber. It is really mesmerizing to watch him, and he just has this feel or intuition with it. And I can see people in the center watching him and coming up and asking like how old he is, because he's small, but he's able to just pull himself up a wall. And I remember seeing there's a clip of Tiger Woods when he's 2 on the Bob Hope show, and he is just a natural. He can just swing a golf club, and he can just putt. And and I have no aspirations that Rams is going to be the Tiger Woods of climbing, but just more mentioning it because it is so natural. There is nothing that I've done or that we've done. It is just within him, and you put him in that environment and he just knows what to do. Those are just a couple of examples of things we are doing with the kind of let grow philosophy in mind. And obviously there are limits at this stage because he is only 3, but it is something that we're going to continue to do more and more. And as he gets older, we just continue to expand on this. The next thing to mention, I got married. We were meant to be getting married in the April time, or in the end of April, beginning of May, in France in the beginning of this year. That obviously had to be called off because of the pandemic. We then pushed the wedding back to April 2021. And then that has also been cancelled and then pushed back to July in 2022. So hopefully the world is in a good place then, and it will feel very overdue to have a proper party. But with getting married in France, in a different country, we always had to get married in the UK first to actually do the official part of the wedding. And so we, had just pushed that part of it back to September when we had to change it in the May time. And when it was rolling around and we were still able to do it, we decided to just do it anyway. And so we had a very 2020 wedding with Ali, Ramsay, and myself, and then 3 friends who were all wearing masks. And then just went out for a meal afterwards, and it was all very, very low key and enjoyable. But it's, I am now married, and it does still feel weird on the podcast to say my wife, probably partly because of listening to Adam Buxton's podcast. If you are a listener to Adam Buxton's podcast, you will know that whenever he says my wife, he says it in this weird robot voice, and so I subconsciously feel like I'm going to slip into that every time I say it. So we got married in September time, and so if you've been hearing me say my wife instead of my partner on the podcast for a while, that is why there has been that change. So then the next thing is Seven Health and what's been going on that front and changes at Seven Health. And so as I mentioned earlier on, it was a more challenging year, more challenging at the start of the year or the first half of the year. At the end of 2019, I had taken on 2 new practitioners. I had started working with a company that was helping with Instagram. I had Drew, who was working here, and she was helping doing the marketing and the running of everything around here. So we had really in the second half of 2019, ramped everything up with the intention of then having more people working here and more revenue coming in and all of that. Ali had also quit her job at the end of 2019 and actually finished up working at the beginning of 2020 in February time. And the goal with that was kind of twofold. One, just to be able to spend more time with Ramsay before he goes off to school and being able to be more of a mom. And we aren't having any more kids, and so she really wanted to value that time, but also just for her own health. I've talked more on that on previous updates around her rheumatoid arthritis and just the stress of going into a job in London and all the travel as part of that, because we live out in the countryside, and just wanted to be able to focus more on her health and being in a position that we are lucky that we could do that. And so everything was kind of pointing towards 2020 being a much bigger year for Seven Health and kind of needing to be that way because of the expenses. But then the first half of the year, because of the pandemic and for other reasons as well, it was just a lot slower, and there was much more outgoings that needed to be paid, and it was definitely much more of a challenging time. And I had the vision at the end of last year, and part of the reason why I was doing that was trying to create Seven Health as something bigger than just me and growing it into a larger company. But with the experience I had this year, and also just the reflection on realizing where my strengths lie and how do I like spending my time, I kind of just changed my mind on this. So Seven Health is now back to just being me in terms of the practitioner front. And Drew is also no longer here, and Ali is now working for Seven Health. So it is very much a family business. And we've just had much more of a recognizing like what do we want to be spending our time on, what is important, both in terms of for the business, but in terms of what we're good at and what we enjoy. Really kind of pulled back on Instagram. I really kind of went in quite hard on Instagram from about September, October last year, and over that time had a number of different social media managers or companies helping out as part of that, and just got to a point where I realized just it really wasn't working the way that I wanted it to be, and just knowing that to make Instagram work successfully, you need to be spending a lot of time on it. You need to be interacting rather than just posting. And my heart just does not lie in Instagram or in social media. I love writing blog posts. I love doing the podcast, and I just can't do everything. So yeah, we are still posting on Instagram and on Facebook, but it is kind of much more reduced. It's much more of just a distribution channel rather than creating content that is specifically for the channel. So creating Instagram only content, that's just not happening. And it also just made me realize of just how much like failure is part of running a business, and failure is not always the appropriate term, because there are things that you do that work for a while, or you enjoy them for a while, and then at some point you change and you no longer want to be doing those things. I mean, over the years I've done supper clubs, I've had different online programs, I've tried developing an app, I did speaking engagements in offices and at conferences. Like I've done lots and lots of things, and I've learned a lot from these experiences, and all of those are things that I'm not doing anymore. So yeah, they could be seen as failures, but I'm actually okay with that. And yeah, that a lot of business things don't necessarily go the way that you hope or that you anticipate, but actually things do work out. I also, from having that quieter or less clients, or just quite a time at the start of the year, it did really make me reevaluate how I spend time and what I want to spend time on, and wanting to get that better work-life balance, and not just be constantly working. Like, yes, it's great that Ali is now able to be looking after Ramsay more, and that we have a nanny that can be helping out for 3 days a week. And so in some senses, if I wanted to be working all the time, I could, but I just genuinely don't. And I want to find that balance between those things. And more recently, that has meant that the podcast has been becoming something that is once every 2 weeks. So for the last little while, there's been one new episode, and then a rebroadcast episode, and then new episode, and I think that's the way it's going to be for a while. That it's going to be a new episode every 2 weeks, just in terms of getting that balance right. Then the next thing is Ali, and I don't have a huge amount to say on this. I know in other update podcasts that I've done, I've kind of devoted more time to her, just because her health hadn't been so great, and it had provided more challenges, and so it was more relevant. But the kind of good news is that like health-wise, she's the best that she's been since we've had Ramsay. And look, things aren't perfect. There's still ups and downs. There are still times where she's having flares as part of the rheumatoid arthritis, but on the whole, things are much improved. And a big part of that, I do think, is because she's not having to go into London and do that job and everything that entailed as part of the travel, etc. So yeah, I'm very grateful that having less stress, at least less stress in one realm, has been really helpful for that. In terms of me, I've finally managed to develop a fairly reliable meditation practice. This has always been something I've suggested with clients, or at least something I've suggested with clients for the last, 5 or 6 years, but just never really managed to put into practice myself. But then it was probably about the May time that I started it, and I got up to about 70 days, and probably took me about 80 days to get there, or 90 days to get there. And then I had kind of a couple of months with doing nothing again, and now I'm back to around about 30 odd days, and I'm probably doing it 4 or 5 days a week, typically not on the weekend, and there's probably some day during the week that it gets missed, but most of the time it's happening. And more importantly is it's starting to then bleed out into real life. So I notice my thoughts and my emotions as they rise up, and being better at being an observer, or better at being objective, rather than just being instantly swept up in it. And obviously I'm human and it doesn't always work, but yeah, I am really starting to see the benefits of meditation, and that's probably part of the reinforcing thing that is then getting me to keep up the practice. I've actually been wanting to write a long blog post on this as well, and I've got a post that's about half done, so it will see the light of day at some point, and just kind of going into more detail on this in terms of the benefits that I've noticed, and then how I've managed to have it be a practice after such a long time when it didn't work. I've noticed this year, and this is probably connected with the meditation, is I'm just doing a little better in the wintertime. I think I'd noticed the last handful of years that I probably am affected by seasonal affective disorder. I mean, in a more mild way than maybe some people, but it did definitely affect me, and I would definitely have more low points during the winter time. And at least at this point, it is seemingly better. And I do think that the meditation is at least part of why that is occurring. So that's been good. I had a fairly eye-opening experience recently, and this kind of connects to some of my comments earlier on about realizing the importance of people and seeing friends and family. Ali and Ramsay went up to Scotland together a couple of months ago while I stayed at home, and I was like super excited. I hadn't had time on my own like this, I don't know, since Ramsay's born, or before Ramsay was born. It's probably been like 4 years since I've had any real extended time on my own. And as I said, like, I'm an introvert. I love my own company. I had like loads of movies and documentaries and shows that I wanted to watch, and I wanted to just be able to do nothing, like just to chill, to watch, to eat, to sleep, and repeat. And like, whenever I would have times of stress or things feeling overwhelming, I have just this fantasy of just being able to have long stretches on my own. And so I was in this situation where I was finally getting this to happen. And by the time that Rams and Ali left, I was actually pretty knackered. I'd had a couple of months of fairly heavy work time and was feeling rather wiped. So yeah, I said that I want to get that work-life balance, and I definitely had some time where that was not occurring. And so yeah, I was pretty wiped, and so it just felt like this is the perfect time for them to be going away, and I was still obviously needing to work, but I was going to pull back on some things and then have a whole weekend of just really doing absolutely nothing, and was imagining that I would feel really revitalized from it. And it didn't do what I expected it to do. I did get to do what I intended in terms of watching shows and listening to lots of podcasts and barely leaving the house, barely talking to anyone. And so it went to plan on that front. But yeah, how I felt and how I responded to it was not what I expected. For the first day or two, it was nice and novel, but it kind of just went downhill after that. And I kind of felt like I was slipping into depression. And I'm not saying that flippantly, like it literally felt like this. And on day 4 or day 5, when I spoke to Ali, I really mentioned it. I was like, this just feels, really, really quite dark. And I think the weekend of just doing nothing and seeing no one, which I thought would be revitalizing, felt quite sad and lonely. And I was actually really happy for the experience. And I'm glad I got to have that extended time on my own, because if it had only been for a day or two, I wouldn't have realized this. I wouldn't have reached that point, and I still would have had that fantasy in my mind of like, oh gosh, it would be so amazing to have this extended time where I'm not seeing or talking to anyone. But now that I've had that experience, I realize I just need that in small quantities, and that I can have a couple of hours or half a day or something like that, and that will scratch that itch. And if I hadn't had this extended period, I don't think I would have made that realization. And so while I am an introvert, I really do crave connection and people. I just want it in the right way, and I just want it in the right amount. And so, I was very grateful for that not so pleasant experience. The only holiday that we've been on this year, so obviously I mentioned went to Australia at the start of the year for my sister's wedding, but after returning from that in the very end of January or the start of February, whenever it was, we haven't gone on a holiday at all for the rest of the year, except for one short excursion to Dorset. So we went, it's about 2 hours away from where we live, 2 hour drive. We went camping for a couple of nights, and just discovered the most beautiful beaches, down in Dorset. And I've been spoiled. I grew up in Sydney and have just, spent my life at the beach, and, Sydney or Australia has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And so every time I go to the beach in the UK, or at least up until that point, I'm pretty disappointed. I mean, most of the time it's pebbles, which I'm not a fan of. I prefer a sandy beach. Also, a lot of the kind of seaside towns and beach locations in the UK feel a little bit like time has forgotten them and can feel a little bleak. And so, I never really enjoyed them that much, and then found this kind of beautiful stretch of beaches in Dorset, where it was sandy beach, where it felt nice and vibrant, and had just this experience that I didn't expect to have in the UK. It made me realize just how much I do miss the beach and how much I miss the sea, and kind of came away with this plan of like, I want to move here. I want to be somewhere where I can be having this much more on my doorstep and be close to this. And I still think I would want to be living in the countryside, but you can be in the countryside and then be only a 15-minute drive or a 20-minute drive or whatever it is to the beach, and that is then very practical and very doable in the way that living 2 hours away is not so. I'm kind of thinking that as a potential 2, 3, 5 year plan of moving somewhere that is going to have that much closer. The final thing just to say is Christmas is coming up, and for Christmas this year I'm going to head up to Scotland, and this is something I've never done before. So Ali is originally from Scotland, and we've been together for a decade, I think, or at least a decade's worth of Christmases, could be longer. Just over that time, we've made it to Australia 5 times. I think my folks came over here for one of those Christmases, and so we had Christmas with them, and then the rest of the time we've had it with friends. And so we've never made it up to Scotland before, and so I really looking forward to that. And after a year of not being able to see many people and see friends and family, the thought of just doing Christmas with the three of us wasn't particularly appealing, and we were really wanting to have it with people, and so made the decision to go up to Scotland, and yeah, it'll be great. I know Ramsay's really excited to hang out with his cousins and play with them, and it's in the Scottish Highlands, so very beautiful scenery. Although with only a handful of hours of sunlight, I'm not sure how much we'll actually get to see. But I'm good with staying indoors and drinking wine, so that would suit me as well. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of it. I was chatting with a friend recently, and she works in catering in events, and has recently moved from London out to Ibiza because her events company had kind of disappeared somewhat because of the pandemic. And yeah, she was just commenting that if at this point of the year you run your own business and your head is above water, then you should be grateful and that things are going well. And yeah, that was definitely a reminder, and it is a thing that I have kept in mind, especially for this second half of the year, that things are going well, and that it's been a crazy year, and we are still here and still surviving and still in a good position. So that is it for this update. I hope you have a nice holiday period, whatever you're up to. I know it's going to be very different this year from others. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed hearing what I've been up to. It always feels slightly weird just talking all about this stuff, but apparently people are interested, so I'm happy to do it. I will be back next week with a rebroadcast episode, but in 2 weeks with another guest interview. So until then, take care, and I will see you soon.